So today we're going to look at Europeans settling North Carolina and the first attempts to settle North Carolina with the colony at Roanoke. So use the presentation to complete the guided notes. The guided notes are on the back of your colonization for Gold, God, and Glory article that we read. So that kind of gives an introduction already, and now we'll take these notes to kind of go a little bit farther, a little bit more in depth with some of the information from that article. So first, why were the Americas explored and why were they taken over by Europeans? So the Americas were founded first in searches for new routes of trade. Remember, Columbus was trying to go west to get to Asia. He ran into the Americas. Then Europeans discovered that there's this whole continent with people already living on it, of the two continents, North and South America. As they discover that, they can also use the Americas for trade and use the Americas kind of transport goods to other places around the world as well. Some people come to escape debt. If you were in debt back in your home country, you could leave your home country, travel to the new world, and hopefully escape from that debt. Some people were looking for fame, looking to become famous, or adventure and fortune or easy gold. Some people came looking to get rich. Some people came for land. Europe was very, very crowded. It's not a very big continent, not a high population, still has a high population today. The Americas offered a lot of land with not a very large population existing on it, so people came hoping to get land, exotic things and products. People came, unfortunately, also to make money off the slave trade. The slave trade was very profitable. A lot of people became very rich. A lot of people died and became very poor because of the slave trade. But Europeans explored and took over the Americas in part to make money off the slave trade. And one more thing that we'll talk about, a reason for why people explored, took over the Americas, and why they settled in the Americas was looking for religious and political freedom. So the ability to practice their religion or their political views in the Americas if they were allowed to practice those views in Europe. Some of the conquerors, especially the conquerors that took over other parts of South America and also North America as well. If they were Spanish, they were called conquistadors. Why were Europeans able to defeat the Indians or the Native Americans, basically? Europeans had much better weapons. They had steel, they had guns. Native Americans were using mostly spears and bows and arrows. Even though they could fire their bow and arrow a lot faster than a European could fire their gun, just the sheer power of the gun in many cases overwhelmed the sheer numbers of the Europeans. Mostly their weapons technology, the sheer weapons technology of the Europeans overpowers the Native Americans. Europeans use horses, and that's a huge advantage. It's like the cavalry, it's like the tank of the day. In some cases, Native Americans thought that Europeans were gods. There were a few different stories, a few different Native American tribes who had stories of gods returning from their versions of heaven, from the ocean in the fancy dress. And when Europeans came off the boats in their big armor and fancy dress, it looked like some of those stories were coming true. So the Native Americans didn't think at first that Europeans were threats. European diseases killed a lot. Almost 90% of Native Americans were wiped out between a war or diseases that were brought from Europeans that Native Americans did not have any immunity to. Things that would make us sick for just a couple days, like the common cold, would sometimes often kill a Native American because they had no immunity built up. You can ask Mr. Pitts about that one in science class at some point when you talk about immunity and disease. There were also internal divisions among Native American groups. Native Americans were not just one group. There were many, hundreds and hundreds of tribes. Some got along, some fought. Europeans played the fighting and the differences between different groups for their advantage, and deceptions and tricks or broken treaties. Europeans often claimed that they would do one type of treaty with Native Americans, and then if something to kind of give Native Americans some land while the Europeans took over other land. But then if Europeans found something on the land that the Native Americans were on that they wanted, then they took it and they went back and broke their treaties. So that's a broad overview of exploration and taking over the Americas by Europeans. Focus more on North Carolina next. So early explorers to North Carolina came trying to find ways to get rich. They were looking for gold, basically gold and silver. The early explorers to both North Carolina and Virginia did not really want to work. Usually they were kind of middle class or upper middle class or wealthy that were used to somebody else doing all the work, but they came without anybody else to do the work. They had to do the work themselves. So early explorers came and spent all their time looking for gold and didn't spend time planting food or building shelter. And a lot of early settlements that try to get started fail miserably because they don't bring workers, they don't bring families, they just bring rich men trying to get even richer. So the person the capital of North Carolina is named after is Sir Walter Raleigh. He's the first one to try and set up a colony in North Carolina. He does do some exploration in North Carolina, and with Roanoke, the Lane and White Roanoke colony, which are two early attempts to colonize Roanoke, he helps plan those colonies, but he doesn't actually come over and do it himself. Ralph Lane, who's on the left, leads the first attempt to colonize Roanoke. Here, White is the second man to attempt to colonize Roanoke. Both of their attempts to colonize Roanoke and start a colony in North Carolina fail. Roanoke is known as the Lost Colony. I'm going to go into more depth in this here next. But in essence, some colonists were there. They brought supplies on their first trip to the island. They start to run out of supplies. So John White goes back to England to get more supplies. And when he comes back to Roanoke, everybody's gone. So we saw just now the unsuccessful attempts to settle North Carolina. The thing that made the first successful attempts by white settlers were people looking for land to plant tobacco. So the colony to the north, Virginia, had become wealthy off planting tobacco. They were running out of space for tobacco farms. So some white settlers from Virginia, came down to North Carolina looking to get bigger farms and plant more tobacco. And tobacco was a big cash crop, sold for lots of money back in England and Europe, and that's how most of the early English colonies made their money, especially in the South. Okay, so that finishes the European settled North Carolina presentation. Now you'll need to take out a sheet of notebook paper and take notes on the 5 things listed below. I'm going to title the notes Roanoke. You can either make it a foldable and fold over the flaps and cut out each flap, or you can just write the notes on your sheet of paper. It's entirely up to you. Roanoke. So Roanoke was the first English colony in the New World. It was settled before Jamestown and before Plymouth. It doesn't succeed, it doesn't last, but it was one of the first attempted English colonies back in 1584. It was located on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So here's where Roanoke and the Lost Colony is. Here's where Jamestown was, which was the first permanent and successful English colony in the New World. So I mentioned Sir Walter Raleigh already. Here's some pictures of him. He's going to the Queen, asking for permission to come to the New World and try to set up a colony. He oversaw the voyage to the New World. He planned the trip, basically. That was his role, was to plan things, say how many people were going to come, what supplies they needed, things like that. He was ordered to find both gold and land for England. Land they were able to find, gold, not so much. John White. So John White comes, and is the one who actually comes over to Roanoke and is in charge of the actual expedition to set up a colony. He supervises. He's kind of like the governor. He's in charge. It's his job to carry out Sir Walter Raleigh's plans. As I mentioned, they start to run out of supplies, so John White goes back to England. When he comes back, he gets caught up. There's a storm, and there's a war that ties up all the boats, so he's not able to get back to Roanoke right away. When he comes back, everybody's gone. So the lost colony, there were 121 people that were there on the colony. When he left, when he came back, everybody's gone. So what do we think happened? Maybe the Spanish killed him, killed all the colonies. The Spanish had colonists. The Spanish had a colony down in Florida. The first permanent, successful European civilization in the New World was St. Augustine, Florida, which was a Spanish settlement. It's close to what's today Jacksonville. Maybe the Indians killed them. There were Native Americans that lived on Roanoke. For a time, things were going okay, but maybe after John White left, maybe the Indians killed all the colonists. Maybe they died of disease, or maybe the Indians took in the colonists when the colonists ran out of food or decided to move off the island. So your next slide says Croatan. Here is a depiction or a picture of John White returning to Roanoke, and when he comes back, he sees the word Croatan carved into a tree. These are other people that came back with him that were supposed to add more people to the colony. So he gets back, sees Croatan carved into a tree, and then trying to decide what to do next. What happened? Where did these people go? Croatan is the name of a Native American tribe that lived near the island of Roanoke. So the thought is, and the most commonly held belief currently, is that the colonists moved with the Croatans and they moved inland. They've actually found some DNA evidence to suggest that colonists from the 1580s may have interbred with the Native Americans that were part of the Croatan tribe. Here's some different maps. This is going up a river to the island. Here would be a ship. Here's the island of Roanoke here. So our task with this information is we're going to make a DVD cover. But before we actually do that, we're also going to read a read-aloud play about the Lost Colony of Roanoke to give you a little bit more information. But after you've done the notes and the play, then you'll work on this DVD cover. You'll create a DVD cover for a movie about what you think really happened at Roanoke. So it'll be made up, but it has to be historically believable based on the information. So you would talk about the people from that last slide, or those last slides. You would also talk about, you would include some of the different people from the read aloud play that we'll do as a class. So when you have your cover, you'll have a front cover and a back cover. On the front cover, you put the actors and which character they're playing. So I might say it can be people that you know, or it can be real actors, or it can be made up names. So I might say Will Smith as John White. You might say Jeff Symes as Sir Walter Raleigh. And you need to include multiple characters and which character they're playing. You need to come up with a title for your movie. It should include Roanoke somehow, or Lost Colony, or something along those lines as part of the title. You should have one scene or one image from the movie. You should draw a picture of that scene on your cover. You should have a tagline or one sentence that's about the movie. You should have one sentence that describes the movie very briefly. You should have a movie review about this movie gets 5 stars for great action or for historical accuracy. Some sort of review about the movie. And then you also have the back cover, and that is a little bit more up to you, but you have to put things on there. It can include things like a movie rating, more reviews, another scene, how long the movie is, what it's rated, things like that. Okay, so here's a picture to kind of help you out. So some of those different things we talked about. Title, you gotta have a title. Here's the title of this film. Here's an example of a review. This movie gets 4 stars, keeps you on the edge of your seat, historical and thrilling. Here's an example of a tagline. An ancient evil trapped for centuries looking for new blood. Here's an example of a scene, a picture of the main character. And here is an example. So they've got actors listed. Adrian Paul. Now, they don't say what his character is, but you have to say what the character is in yours. So here shows the example of the front cover. Here shows an example of the back cover.